Hello everyone. This video is about game design concepts to help you make better games. Despite how crucial these topics are to good game design, I don't see them being talked about enough on YouTube. So here's a neatly bundled list. Let's start with the holy grail of game design: fun. Fun is a broad term we use to describe a variety of experiences and thus isn't very helpful when trying to design good games. However, understanding the different kinds of fun that video games offer can be very helpful in improving your games. So let's start with a commonly quoted list known as the 8 Kinds of Fun by Mark LeBlanc. First up on the list is sensation. Next comes fantasy, then narrative, challenge, fellowship, discovery, expression, and submission. Most of these terms are self-explanatory. However, if you aren't quite sure of what some of them mean, I encourage researching that specific topic more, and I apologize that it is outside the scope of this video to explain them. Despite being robust, LeBlanc's list is incomplete as it is missing other very obvious and notable types of fun that video games provide, like the pleasure of competition. I wanted to point this out because I don't want you to think that these are the only kinds of fun that can be had playing video games, but this can be a great starting point. So, when you design your games, think very carefully and intentionally about which kinds of fun you are and are not offering to the player. This can save you from mindlessly cobbling something together and praying that it ends up being fun. Let's take a look at a quick example to hammer the point home. Consider chess. It definitely doesn't offer the fun of fellowship, nor sensation, and very little in terms of fantasy, narrative, or expression. Instead, the primary fun of chess comes from competition and challenge. Next up are the related concepts of skill floor, skill ceiling, and replayability. Skill floor means the minimum amount of skills required to play a game effectively, and skill ceiling refers to the maximum skill, mastery, and competence achievable in a game. Skill floor directly affects how easy it is to pick up a game, because if a game has high skill floor like Dota, for example, it can take a very long time for a player to become effective at the game and thus for them to start having fun. On the other hand, skill ceiling has to do with the replayability of a game, as games that have less skills to master and that are easily mastered are less replayable, like tic-tac-toe for example. The best balance is usually considered to be one of low skill floor and high skill ceiling, as such a game is easy to pick up for new players and keeps existing players entertained endlessly because there are so many skills to master. Team Fortress 2 is a paragon of this concept. The fact that it's been 16 years since it first launched and still boasts a thriving community of players and content creators despite having stopped receiving any major updates speaks volumes about the effectiveness of this concept. Expected value is simply the average of all the outcome values of an action. It is a powerful tool in game balancing. Consider the following example. In a simple gambling game, rolling a 6-sided dice to the number 5 gives you $5, but rolling anything else costs you $1. The probability of getting a 5 is 1 in 6, which if multiplied by positive 5 gives you positive 0.83. And the probability of the remaining outcomes, that is 5 over 6, multiplied by negative 1 leaves you with negative 0.83. Adding up both the values, we get an expected value of $0, which means that this is neither a winning nor a losing game for the player, and thus the game is perfectly balanced. Expected value can also be used to make the gameplay feel more interesting by doing something like this. If you have a player that can kill an enemy to gain 100 points, then we can say that the expected value of killing an enemy is 100 points. However, if we make it so that killing an enemy gives the player 500 points, but there is only a 20% chance of the player gaining those points from killing any enemy, then the expected value of killing an enemy is 20% of 500, which is still 100. In this way, we can make changes to the way a game feels using expected value without disturbing the balance of the game. ADSR curves define how an in-game parameter changes with input over time. ADSR stands for attack, decay, sustain, and release, which are terms used to define the various phases of a time versus parameter graph. A parameter could be any value modified by player input, such as character speed. You can use ADSR curves to change the feel of the game. For example, if a player input modulates character speed and their ADSR curves looks like this, then you have a slippery character, kind of like Mario. But if instead it looks like this, then controlling the character will feel tight and responsive, such as in Celeste. Not only can this concept be used to modify game feel, but it can also be used to solve practical design problems. In my own game that I recently completed, I had a mechanic which allowed the player to rotate a gun in order to aim at enemies. A problem that arose was that when playing with a high sensitivity setting, it would be very hard to make slight adjustments to your aim but lowering the sensitivity to solve this issue meant that it took way longer to rotate the gun over bigger angles. So I employed an ADSR curve such that the gun now accelerates before attaining its full rotation speed, so that you can make tiny adjustments to your aim as well as swing your gun wildly when you need to. You can play the game on your browser with the gun acceleration setting turned on and off to feel the difference that ADSR curves can make. The link is in the description. Adding some element of risk versus reward in a game is an easy way to offer interesting choices to the player. To that end, expected values and probability can be of great help. Skill chains refer to how different player actions can be combined to perform different skillful acts within the game. For example, in the game of Team Fortress 2, when you're playing as soldier, running, jumping, and shooting are 3 separate actions that the player can take. However, combined, they can be used to achieve what's called rocket jumping, a high-skill activity that offers amazing mobility. Creating deliberate skill chains will help you map out all the different skills to be mastered in your game, thus helping you make games with great mechanical depth, and can also help you lay out levels because you can gradually introduce the skills to players on different levels, starting with the skills at the bottom of the chain. Emergence is a highly important, revered, and coveted phenomenon in game design. It is when fun interactions not written in the rules of the game emerge out of the rules. Going back to our previous example of the soldier class in TF2, rocket jumping is not coded as a separate phenomenon in the game, but it is rather a result of the explosive nature of soldier's projectile paired with its ability to damage and knock back the player as well. While there is no specific formula for achieving emergence in a game, there are a few ways to sow the seeds for it. Number 1, by increasing the number of verbs in a game. That is, having a large number of things that a player can do. Example, moving, jumping, shooting, grabbing, crafting, etc. Number 2, by increasing the number of objects in a game. That is, having a large number of things that a player can use their verbs upon. A few examples of objects that the verb shoot might be able to work with would be enemy, barrel, chandelier, bird, door, and so on. Hopefully, you are able to see how this can give rise to more interactions in a game, resulting in more emergent interactions. Number 3, by increasing the number of subjects that a player can choose. What I mean by this is, think about the game of chess, where your verb is move piece. But because there are so many types of pieces, which are the subjects in this case, the meaning of the move piece verb is modified greatly by each piece. In a first-person shooter game, this could mean the different types of weapons like guns and melee weapons, or different types of characters with different stats, all of which modify the meaning of the actions of a player in slight but meaningful and coherent ways. In many games, goals are what keep player going, be it long-term or short-term goals, or goals that are assigned to the player by the designer, or goals that the player creates for themselves. Goals are powerful tools and guide the moment-to-moment gameplay. There's an interesting property of goals by which they trickle down from higher orders to the lowest order and guide the player action. For example, a high order goal for a game could be to defeat a final boss, but to get to the final boss you have to clear the different stages, and so that becomes your goal. But then to clear the stages, you have to clear the levels in each stage, so that becomes your goal. But to clear the level, you have to jump over this Goomba without dying or cross this pit without falling into it, so then that becomes your goal. In this way, moment-to-moment player action gains meaning because cascading up, it is connected to the highest order goal of the game. However, do keep in mind that not all games have to have explicit designer-created goals. You can offer enough possibility space for your player for them to be able to come up with their own goals and pursue them. Such games are usually referred to as sandbox games. Think Minecraft, for example. This is a brilliant concept I learned from Steve Swink's book titled Game Feel. Input sensitivity refers to how many discrete input values an input method is capable of providing to the computer. For example, a simple button like one on a keyboard can only send 2 inputs to the computer, indicating whether it is pressed or not pressed, so it has an input sensitivity of 2. On the other hand, a joystick is able to send a range of decimal values between -1.0 and 1.0, both on the X and Y axes, which make its input sensitivity much higher than that of a button. Response sensitivity, on the other hand, is a measure of how sensitive a game's response is to such input events. Let me explain using another example. Suppose you have a player character controlled using the keyboard buttons A and D, and another character controlled using the X-axis of a joystick. The first character, controlled using the keyboard, is coded in such a way that its speed upon pressing the A or D button gradually increases until it reaches a peak value and similarly decreases gradually after the button is let go, eventually causing the character to stop. The second character, however, instantly gains a maximum speed whenever the joystick is pushed to the left or to the right. Here, the first character is said to have a lot more response sensitivity, despite of the low input sensitivity of the keyboard buttons, whereas the second character has less response sensitivity in spite of using a more sensitive input device. Also, response sensitivity relates to input chording and combination moves, also known as combos, as both of them increase the response sensitivity of the game. Whenever you hear that a character control in a game feels expressive, they are referring to it having a high response sensitivity. Think about Super Mario Bros. And the NES D-pad if you want a shining example of a game with low input sensitivity and high response sensitivity. Lastly, this concept can relate closely to the ADSR curves I've talked about earlier in the video. There's much I've left unsaid for the sake of keeping the video short, and you are encouraged to connect the dots, but I'd be happy to answer any questions in the comments. Interest curves are an interesting way of looking at the organization of content. Interest curves simply refer to the graph of interest over time of a given experience. According to Schell, the best experiences arise from interest curves that look like this, where it starts with a bang that captures the audience's attention, also known as a hook, and peaks and dips strategically throughout the experience, finally ending in a grand crescendo which leaves the audience wanting more. I tried to apply the concept to this very video by starting with the central concern of game design, fun, and ending with a meta demonstration of a neat concept. The video on game design ends here, so you can feel free to stop watching. Thank you very much for tuning in. What's left is for people interested in the functioning of the channel. First of all, I'm back, as promised. It feels great to be making videos for you guys again, and I'm looking forward to interacting with you more. As you guys know, I had initially promised that videos would be uploaded weekly, and I was sticking to that schedule to the best of my ability. After this 4-month-long hiatus, however, I'm wondering if I should now start focusing on quality instead of quantity. Initially, my reasoning for uploading as frequently as possible was the anecdote of the pottery class, where the students were divided into 2 groups, one to be graded on quality and the other on quantity. To the teacher's surprise, the best pots came out of the group that was graded on quantity. So I am still split on which approach to take. Any arguments in favor of either quantity or quality will be greatly appreciated. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video and got something out of it. This has been Cupid. I'll see you in the next one.